Well, hello everybody, and welcome to our live broadcast from my studio in the Rocky Mountains that is just about to get a snowstorm. And all of that is in conjunction with my new book that's just come out, Overcoming Estrogen Dominance. It's 2 years of work, but really it's probably like 10 years of experience and that went into this book. So dedicated to all the women out there suffering from fibroids, endometriosis, terrible periods, miscarriages. If you're having issues with fibrocystic breast, painful breast, periods that are all over the place, perimenopause, hot flashes, this is the book. This is the book that's dedicated to you. You can get the book on overcomingestrogendominance.com. We have a special gift card for you, which I think you would really appreciate. So go there, then you come back to this website, enter your receipt number, and then we'll send you all the good stuff your way. In case you've been missing out on the past videos that I've been doing, and this is day 4 today, so there's plenty of other videos, including cooking demos, great interviews with various experts, readings from the book. All of that is going to be posted on overcomingestrogendominance.com/events. So you can get all the replays right there, including recipes and even ingredients lists that you can go and shop and cook with me when you're watching the video. So today, I invited Dr. Shawn Tassone, who is a wonderful OBGYN. We often refer to him as the America's OBGYN. An incredible wealth of knowledge and compassion towards women's hormones and health. And I invited him to talk to us about testing for estrogen dominance because it is one of the most common questions that we get. And I think there's a lot of confusion around what kind of testing we should be doing, whether it's blood. You come back from your doctor's office and say, hey, everything looks great. And yet this person's got fibroids, super heavy periods. Her mother has a history of ovarian cancer, but we are told everything is okay. And so there's a great sense of nuance in when it comes to testing your hormones properly and having the right diagnosis and right interpretation of those tests. And so I couldn't think of a better person to bring on today than Dr. Shawn Tassone. And hello there.
Hi.
I'm so glad we made it today because we almost didn't because of the snowstorms that are happening around the country. But
well, it's like last month it was here in Austin. We had 2 inches of snow and the whole state shut down. And now I was kind of coming to Colorado to visit my kids, and I can't get a flight. And it's funny because there's actually no snow there right now. So it's just the threat that's coming in, I guess.
Yeah, well, I can tell you right now, it's coming. It's coming right now. So you just dodged the bullet. And selfishly, I'm happy that you missed that flight because I get to I have you for this afternoon.
Well, my kids are missing a great meal, but I guess this will do. This is good second for everybody.
All right. So, what I would love to start off with is, you are the guru of when it comes to Dutch testing, and don't roll your eyes. You are, and your knowledge is always very inspiring. You helped me a lot with my first book, and helped me with some of the medical edits on it, which I really appreciated so much. So, what I would love to talk to you about today is just maybe the first issue, and that is, why is it that I remember when I was in private practice, I would have women walking into my office and show me blood test results, right, of their estrogen, progesterone, DHEA, testosterone, cortisol levels, and be told that everything is fine. Yet they were falling apart with screaming symptoms of estrogen dominance, highly irregular periods, fibroids. You name it, right? Like I gave an example, like a woman whose mother had ovarian cancer, right, or breast cancer. The woman has lost her gallbladder. It's just like, it all lines up. And yet she's told that everything is okay. Everything is looking spanking clean and good. What's going on there? Why is that happening?
Well, right now there's a big push online. There's actually a few OBGYN influencers that are really kind of attacking this notion of hormone imbalance. And I think that, and they're saying that it doesn't even exist, which is ridiculous. But that's kind of.
Are they men? Are they men?
No, they're all women.
No.
Every one of them, yeah. There's about 6 of them, and what they've done is they've banded together, and whenever something comes up that's abnormal, like that they don't agree with, they really go after it. And it's really sad, but yeah, it's really interesting. And so I think that my colleagues, I think that reflects kind of a sentiment that's in the Western kind of practice right now, and that is that it's either normal or abnormal. And the thing is that ovarian or estrogen dominance, there's this thought process in Western medicine that it's not really a thing, which is funny because we have a CPT code that is billable called hyperestrogenism. It's like a thing, and we have a code for it, just like we have a code for decreased testosterone. And so hormone imbalances are real. We recognize that they're real. The thing is that I think most OBGYNs, what they'll do is they'll look at the test results and it's either normal or abnormal. And I always like to frame it in the sense that, okay, that means you're in the house, but where are you in the house? You could be in the basement, you could be up on the roof, but there's a difference. And for estrogen, it also depends on your progesterone. I think that's something that's really off key here, but the doctors will just look at it because they've got, to their defense, 40 or 50 patients that day, and they've got a woman sitting in front of them that has all these symptoms, and they'll say, well, you're normal because your levels are in the range, so they're normal, and they don't really want to attack the symptoms because it really takes longer. So what do? They put them on birth control pills, which causes a hyperestrogenic state. So it's like, they're not really fixing the problem.
Right. So tell us about your take on the accuracy of using blood testing serum for cortisol hormones such as estrogen, progesterone, cortisol, DHEA, testosterone, pregnenolone, versus using other forms such as saliva or urine.
So blood is a very accurate test because it's obviously what's in your blood. The one downside to blood is that it's simply a snapshot. It's something that while that needle is in your arm. So it's a limited timed test. Blood is also usually covered by insurance, so it's wonderful. And the benefit to blood is that results come back rather quickly, probably within a few days. So there's benefits to blood, and I like to use blood because for me, a lot of my patients want to use their insurance because they pay a lot of money for it. And I totally think it's great. And so I do order a lot of serum testing. The other thing about serum that urine can't really do is check for vitamin D and thyroid. So usually on my hormone patients, I've got to get some sort of blood testing anyways because of those 2 hormones. The thing about serum is, like I said, it's very accurate. The thing about saliva, well, the downside to serum first is you can't check cortisol very well. So that's the one other limitation of serum is cortisol testing. Salivary testing is excellent for cortisol, in my opinion, but otherwise it's fairly inaccurate. I know there's a lot of practitioners that would probably debate that. I just don't use it because what we found is that if you check serum and you check saliva, the numbers can be vastly different. Saliva also usually checks unbound hormone, which can be better for some people. I just don't see the accuracy warranting the test, except for cortisol. Urine testing is great as well. It does check all your sex hormones. It checks cortisol, melatonin, some certain vitamin levels, and things like organic acid. So it's actually a very great test. The downside to it is that it can take up to 3 weeks to get the results back. It sometimes it costs somewhere around $350 or $400, and a lot of people can't afford that. And the testing is not cumbersome, but it's a little bit more involved than having your blood drawn. You've got 4 urine strips that you have to pee on and dry them out and then mail them in. And so, and it doesn't check for thyroid or vitamin D. So those are the limitations, but it's actually quite an excellent test. And I'll have a lot of patients also will do blood and urine because blood I can start it right away and start fixing something. Then the urine comes back a few weeks later and backs up the serum results, but also gives me the aspects of the cortisol and the organic acid tests.
So apart from, we're going to talk a little bit more about Dutch in just a second. And I'm going to, as you are talking, I'm going to pull out my Dutch test results and let's go over mine and then, and let's just compare it to like what really can go wrong and what can Dutch really show us. let me ask you, apart from doing Dutch testing or whether somebody's doing saliva or blood, what other tests would you do? Because you're going to mention doing serum testing. And what else would you test for in serum apart from just hormones itself? Are there other things, other markers that you want to see that might impact hormones that are really important for you to see?
Well, for estrogen dominance, for sure, but for most other hormones, most of the time, you want to make sure liver function is good. So you can do what's called a comprehensive metabolic profile, which will check kidney and liver function and also give you your electrolytes. Serum can also check your blood count. For some women, that depends on age groups, but especially if they're having heavy periods from estrogen dominance, I will check a blood count to make sure that they're also not anemic. You can do some allergy testing with blood for food intolerances and stuff like that. But most of the time when I'm seeing somebody for hormone issues, I will check estradiol, progesterone, a free and total testosterone, along with what's called a sex hormone binding globulin. We'll check free T3 and a free T4, which are your thyroid hormones, along with TSH. Most physicians really just look at TSH. You can also look at TPO antibodies or thyroid peroxidase antibodies and thyroglobulin antibodies to look for possible issues with Hashimoto's or Graves' disease, which can also be affected in women that have estrogen dominance. And so there's a lot of other testing. It just really depends on the patient and what their medical history is and things like that.
I am just trying to find my Dutch results. And so that's gonna surprisingly kind of, I'm having a hard time finding it. I got a new computer, so there we go. Tell us a little bit about what is what can Dutch, like if you look at it just a bigger picture of Dutch, like what can it show us? Where can this really help a woman understand where she is with her hormones?
Well, because Dutch is a 24-hour test, it gives you more of a kind of a day in the life, if you will, versus like a simple snapshot, which is what a blood test is going to do. One of my favorite things interpreting the Dutch is to walk a woman through her day just based on her cortisol profile. I mean, 99% of the time, if I describe her day looking at her cortisol panel, I mean, it's like a light bulb goes off and they're like, that's exactly my day right there. And it's really interesting because you can usually just tell that from the cortisol. But the Dutch, I think Dutch is great to back up the blood test, like I said, because it does give you a bigger picture. I've had a few patients where Dutch will come back a little bit different than the blood just because of the fact that it's 24 hours and not just a spot check. What I also do is for complicated patients. So a lot of the times with blood, you can get it fairly close. You can get people feeling good. But after maybe one or two tests with with blood, if I can't quite zero in on the issues that they're having, I will go ahead and run a Dutch test just because it's kind of a day in the life. I think I saw your Dutch test pop up there for a second. There it is. So I don't know if you want me to go through this or if you, but I certainly can. You have a situation, actually, if you're looking at Dutch, the first page of the test is going to be, your estradiol, your progesterone, your testosterone. And you have to coordinate the results in your mind when you're interpreting these, along with the timing of your cycle. So if you're a menopausal woman, obviously there's no cycle, so it's pretty easy to interpret. If you're cycling, however, you're going to have a situation where you need to know. So like in your case, your estrogen and progesterone are actually pretty well balanced off. They're almost like exactly where they should be. However, if this was in the second half of your cycle around day 21, your progesterone could be a little bit low and you could have symptoms with PMDD, or what we used to call PMS, where you have headaches and irritability and heavy periods and things like that. The interesting thing is with your cortisol, you actually, your morning and mid-morning, or your mid-morning is excellent. Your morning, it looks like you're one of those people I would probably describe as kind of waking up, hitting the ground running, like you're going right when you wake up. and then you're buzzing through the day, and then maybe in the afternoon and evening, that's when you kind of start to fizzle out a little bit. The good news is your testosterone is pretty excellent for 47. Most of the time I see testosterone completely tanked. So I wouldn't necessarily say in your case you had estrogen dominance unless
Shawn, I teach that stuff. I better don't have it.
Well, I know that's good. You don't have it, so you're walking the talk here.
Let's talk about patients who might be having estrogen dominance. What does it look like?
So I had a lady yesterday, I was telling you before we got on, who I like to see the estrogen to progesterone ratio if we're looking at blood tests. That is a tiny bit different, but not so much. Let's say I found that women feel normal when their estradiol to progesterone is about 10-to-1 ratio. This lady yesterday was a pretty classic, but hers was 1,500-to-1. Her estrogen was through the roof. Her progesterone was practically zero. And she's the typical, PCOS kind of patient who hasn't had a cycle in months. She's got breast tenderness, mood swings. She feels super edgy, like she just feels like she wants to choke people all the time, even though she really has no reason to feel that way, because the progesterone is supposed to come in and really calm things down. And you think of estrogen as being just stimulatory, constantly, not just stimulating the lining of your uterus, but stimulating breast tissue and your brain and all your other bodily functions. And then the progesterone doesn't come in to block those receptors and upregulate your GABA, which then calms you down. So you're constantly stimulated. You just feel like you're on edge all the time. So snapping at your kids or your spouse, even though you feel like, and for you, it's bothersome, like that bothers you, that it's not normally that way. Headaches, not sleeping, weight gain because you might be a little bit insulin resistant, water retention. I kind of call it the big bag of hurt, because everything just doesn't feel right. And then you go to the doctor and they're like, oh, you're fine. Here, take these birth control pills. And basically you're taking a hyperestrogenic state and you're giving a hyperestrogenic state. So it really isn't a great treatment.
What else can we deduce from the Dutch? Where would you want me to go on this?
Go down to the page where we see the estrogen, not the next page, yeah. There we go. And let's look at how you process.
You want the estrogen metabolites, or?
Yeah, just down a little bit more.
A little bit more, okay.
Perfect. So you can see, if you look at the estrone, because the estrone, first of all, is the weakest of the three estrogens. But we're really concerned with how that estrone is processed or metabolized in your body. Initially, you make hardly any 16-hydroxy, which is okay because you're going to process that back to estriol anyways. And actually, if you look at the red arrow, that's a 4-methoxyestrone. That is the estrogen that can potentially damage DNA and be slightly carcinogenic. So we don't want women to process that pathway, especially if you have a family history of breast cancer or you have breast cancer yourself. You don't want to be going down that pathway, and you really aren't, not too substantially. And then the beautiful thing, you are definitely walking your talk here. You have a 2-methoxy pathway that you're making quite a bit. You actually are doing okay. Your COMT, the way that you methylate, you might be somebody that would benefit from like a pre-methylated B vitamin. But what's going to make you go down that green pathway more, if you're a woman that doesn't, are compounds like DIM that is found in cruciferous vegetables. I'm sure you got a lot of that in your book. And also increasing fiber intake, because fiber is going to hold on to the estrogen in the stool and you'll evacuate it. The interesting thing is you could be somebody that has high glucuronidase levels. And that's an enzyme in the colon that cleaves the estrogen back so that it comes off the stool and goes back into your bloodstream. So if you do have high estrogen, usually we'll also recommend going on deglucarate or something that blocks that glucuronidase. But you actually process yours really well.
Shawn, can we just talk a little bit about the 2-hydroxyestrone so you guys can see the green, red, and the blue arrow that's going from estrone, the E1 right above. Can you just walk folks through the 3 metabolites?
So 16-methoxy estrone is not something that we normally get too worried about it. It does recycle back into estriol. And estriol is actually what we think might be an actual protective hormone. It's super weak in the body. It doesn't exert a lot of effects. So a lot of women that are taking hormone replacement might be on what's called biased, which is estradiol and estriol. And the estriol component of that is super weak. So some women don't have a lot of symptom resolution when they're using bias because the estriol itself is so weak. I tend not to use estriol just because of that, and I use estradiol because you can see estradiol at the top actually will go to some estriol itself. And then as it also goes to estrone, you will reprocess that sometimes into estriol, and your estriol levels they could be better, but I don't think it's a bad thing because your estrogen, the other thing is if your estrogen levels are on the lower side, which yours were, your metabolites are going to be low as well, just because everything's sort of low. The red pathway is that pathway, that 4-methoxyestrone, that if you look down farther on that picture, you can damage your DNA with that. And if you are using glutathione, that can help protect you. Or if you're also methylating super well, that can protect you. How can we push you more to that green pathway, which is where you produce 2-methoxyestrone? That's things like DIM or diindolylmethane, I3C or indole-3-cyclocarbinol. And then also you can see that COMT value, which is just to the left. That's where you're methylating your estrogen, and that's a secondary pathway to detoxification. And so in your case, your COMT isn't working as well because you can see you're super high in your 2OH, but you're not quite methylating it. So if you did a genetic test, you might be one of those people that doesn't methylate particularly.
Completely. So just to let you know, out of the 5 COMTs, I have 3 that are completely double mutated.
Yeah. That shows here because it says you're low on the left.
Right. And that's part of the reason why I got to do this work and why I jumped into this. I have family members on both sides of my family who passed away from estrogenic cancers. And so my father remarked once that we don't have any women in our family about 50 who still have the uterus.
Wow.
So it's not surprising to see that. But okay. So let's one of the things that I always love when you talk about Dutch is how you present a lot of times cases or hypothetical, in this case here, if you could just do a hypothetical case of tying in the woman's lifestyle and her daily challenges and how they manifest just by looking at her hormones. Like you're like a storyteller of a woman's life by looking at her labs. And I know you make women cry by doing that.
Not on purpose.
I know.
Yeah, it's usually they cry just because for the first time, I think in years, somebody's just validating what they're hearing, or what I'm seeing and what they felt for years, and they've gone. Usually, by the time women get to me, they've seen a few doctors, and so. But it's true. I believe in this. I have a book coming out in July that kind of talks about how hormone imbalance does tell a story. And I call women that are estrogen dominant, the archetype that I call them are queens, because if you think about the consummate female hormone is estrogen, and estrogen in overdrive or leadership in overdrive is a queen. Now, how do I look at different, these storylines, of a queen. You can be a benevolent ruler and you can be kind and lovely. You can be an off with your head type queen. And that's what estrogen dominance can do, is make you feel like you are, typically, running that business and having that lifestyle. But because you don't have the tenets of methylation and you maybe don't know it, and you have a poor diet, you might be carrying a little extra weight. You might be on birth control pills because you're not ovulating because of your stress. I mean, there's so much that can go into that story. But how do we then pacify a queen? How do we make her happier? Well, you can bring in some. The other archetype that I have for estrogen dominance is I call the mother, and that's a woman that has estrogen dominance and low progesterone. It's kind of a double whammy, because those women are also queens. They won their kingdom. They've got their kids and their jobs and whatever, and yet they don't have that pacifying. I call low progesterone the unbalanced heroine. And so you have a hero, an unbalanced heroine, and you have a queen, and those two together make a mother, because mothers are heroes and queens of their domains. And that's a story in and of itself as well. And so what happened was, over the past 20 years of listening to about 40,000 women and sitting with them, I just sort of started hearing similar storylines. And these hormones do tell a story, like you just said.
One of the things that we often get asked, and I was wondering how Dutch can play into this, is why do you see a lot of women who are menopausal, perimenopausal, when their estrogen is already low, progesterone is low, yet they show estrogen dominance?
Yes, that actually happens quite a bit. The women that are in perimenopause, what happens is, if you think of, the engine is sort of sputtering. So you'll get ovulation sometimes, and sometimes you won't. Or if you do get ovulation, you're not getting the progesterone production that you used to. So what happens is you'll get these women that are creating great amounts of estrogen, but they're not then creating the progesterone that they need to come in and balance that out. That happens, I think, more in perimenopause than in most younger women, unless they have like PCOS or some other process that's causing that.
If a woman had a history of progesterone receptor positive breast cancer, would you give her progesterone, whether it's topical or oral?
So I have patients in my...
Even if she's low on progesterone, so she's got a history of that kind of cancer. She's showing really low progesterone, like a lot of women are. Would you then put her on progesterone?
Well, I have women in my practice that have breast cancer that are on hormones, and I will prescribe hormones in the patient where I have a good relationship with her, that she understands that there are risk factors. So the progesterone itself may not cause the breast cancer, but if you have a receptor, it's the same with estrogen. If you have a receptor on that cell that can stimulate the cell, then I could potentially be stimulating that cancer. However, there are some women that are suffering so much. And I remember my mom didn't have breast cancer, she had ovarian cancer. And they wouldn't give her estrogen because of her ovarian cancer. And I think that the last 5 years of my mom's life were fairly miserable because she felt horrible. And so you kind of have to balance that with the quality of life. And I think anybody, especially in this case, the female that has breast cancer, if she's miserable and she can't be the woman that she wants to be, I'm not there to deny her that. I can talk to her about the risks of it. And if she knows me and I know her and she understands those risks and I know she understands those risks, then I will give her some add-back therapy like you're talking about. And I usually will start as low as possible and then work my way up just to alleviate the symptoms. You can also draw blood values and tell that you're not overly stimulating. So that's the other thing is, if she's feeling good, she's sleeping better, she doesn't have a lot of the symptoms anymore, and I draw blood and her progesterone is still kind of on the low side, that's great. That's a win-win, I think. You just want to make sure that you're not giving her too much. Right.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but would you use then Dutch to also monitor those hormones and see, for example, if you're giving her estrogen, are you also looking at how she's breaking down that estrogen that is in a positive way?
Definitely. And I think Dutch is great in those instances too, because I really want to get a better view of what the total progesterone or estrogen production is. And like I said earlier, blood is good, but it can only give me just a snapshot. It can't give me that 24-hour look.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So where can we find you? Where for those ladies who want to get in touch with you, what is the best website for you?
She just posted it. That's a deal where I have some packages online. The great thing about COVID is that it did open up the availability to see people remotely a little bit more, because they relaxed a lot of the ridiculous regulations that we have to live in the state where the patient lives, especially for something like hormones. But so that's a possibility. If I am taking insurance for a lot of women that have insurance, and that won't necessarily, that's more of a cash-based thing for people that don't. If you want to go to my other site, drshawntassone.com, right there, you can even point at it, see. You can see I bite my nails. So you can go there, and that's for people that have insurance. And I'd be more than happy to help. I can make a lot of good recommendations. If I have friends that live where you live, I can certainly refer you to them if you'd rather see somebody close. But yeah, it's definitely something that one of the positives with COVID is, and that may change here eventually. I do think we've changed the way we're going to deliver healthcare now because of COVID. I think a lot of people are actually pretty excited about not having to come to the office to do something silly like go over labs or get their refills on their hormones. And I don't know, it just seems more 21st century to me to do that.
Right. We are going to open up to questions in just a second, you guys. But what I want to ask you is, what are some of your favorite supplements to help break down those metabolites of estrogen, since we're talking about estrogen dominance here, in a more favorable way?
So I'm obviously a big fan of DIM. Obviously, getting a good brand like, something that you have recommended or one of your brands. It's hard to eat sometimes that much cruciferous vegetables, although the recipes in your book, I'm sure, maximize that. But, for those of us that don't want to eat that much broccoli, I think DIM is a great supplement. I'm a big fan of fish oils. I think fish oils help just move the bowels, fiber, magnesium, glycinate, or other, magnesiums can help move the bowels. I think women that are chronically constipated can be more prone to having estrogen dominance. So we want to make sure the bowels are working good. A good probiotic always is beneficial, because if you need that, what we're finding is there's something called the estrobolome in the gut. Those we don't necessarily know exactly which ones they are, but there's definitely gut bacteria in there that help with estrogen detoxification and things like that. And then also I talked earlier about how women that have high estrogen, that have that high glucuronidase, which is an enzyme in the gut that makes your estrogen go back into your bloodstream, which we may not want. Those women deglucarate, which is going to inhibit that enzyme. And then
you're talking about the calcium deglucarate? Calcium
deglucarate. And I'm sure you probably have that as well in your system. So that's another great supplement for that problem.
Where does sulforaphane fall? Do you use sulforaphane at all in your practice?
Occasionally, and a lot of the products that I'll use for estrogen detox have more of like a proprietary formula where they'll have a little of each.
Of everything.
Yeah. I'm a little bit of a purist at times. I like to try to use like the pure products, but sometimes it's easier for a patient to buy something that has the combinations. And I think, I bet you probably have a product that has a little bit of something like that. Sulfofluorine is one of those things I will use in proprietary blends. I don't use it on its own usually because it's just sometimes more expensive. And
yeah, it is an expensive supplement. It's probably one of our most expensive ones because it is hard to extract it. Okay, why don't we dive into there's tons of questions coming in. Letty's asking, is vitex good choice to regulate hormones?
Vitex is one of those things that has been around for 2,000 years. And I think for women that have low progesterone, it's definitely something that's going to help increase their progesterone. A good friend of ours, Nat Kringoudis, is a Chinese medicine physician in Australia. I will tell you, to be perfectly honest, she educated me on Vitex over the past few years. I didn't really use it. Simply because I just didn't know a lot about it. And I have started to incorporate it a lot more, especially for women that are like PCOS type or that have low progesterone in their luteal phase.
Yeah. Hey, you guys, this morning I was showing a demo of a recipe for a PMS heavy periods latte, and it contains Vitex berry in it. I ground it up and put it in the latte and infused it. And so take a look at that video. It's already posted on our Facebook page. And
what does that taste like if you just tasted it by itself?
It's not nice. It's very bitter, but I mixed it up with a couple of other herbs that balance out the flavor, including a bit of ginger and a tiny bit of a sweetener. And it's like, coffee is bitter too, right? But when you put it in milk, like I make my own almond milk, and a tiny bit of sweetener is actually quite delightful. And here's an interesting thing, I talked about it this morning, that Vitex in Germany is used as the first go-to method of increasing progesterone in a woman. So when you see a traditional doc in Germany and you say, hey doc, I've got infertility problems, I've got miscarriages in the first trimester, I can't sleep at night, whatever, right? I'm perimenopausal and showing signs of low progesterone. The first go-to is not of identical hormones. or birth control pills is actually vitex, and is so there's incredible studies out of Germany in the German pharmacopedia on vitex and progesterone. So I'm glad that you mentioned.
In Germany, it's probably actually a written prescription too, I would imagine.
Yeah, it comes, yeah. Mm-hmm.
The strengths they have there are so much stronger than what we use here usually.
How do we test for anemia?
Anemia is just a simple hemoglobin and hematocrit. You could also run, the most common cause of anemia is iron deficiency. So you could also run an iron metabolism panel, just look ferritin and total iron levels. But usually is what's called a CBC, or you just run a hemoglobin hematocrit. It's a blood test.
If you already have progesterone dominance with high estrogens, is vitex going to make the progesterone worse? My arrow on the Dutch were all red, including DHEA, off charts, completely irregular periods, but moods plus sleep plus weight gain are awful.
I don't, progesterone, usually off the charts progesterone is pregnancy. So hopefully, maybe you're pregnant, I don't know. But progesterone to me, anything good can be bad if it's too high. I don't know if vitex would make it worse. If it's already super high, it's probably because you're ovulating. And unfortunately, the good news is you make a lot of progesterone. A lot of women don't. I think if you're having symptoms, it's probably the high estrogen more than the high progesterone that's causing those. I tend to find progesterone is actually, I have women super high, but that's pregnancy. You can get like constipation and just generalized fatigue and things like that. That's why pregnant women have those issues. But if you're saying your cycles are regular, but you're having moods, actually sleep, I usually treat sleep issues with progesterone. So, because it usually increases your GABA receptors you might want to, if you looked at a Dutch, you could see if you were converting to allopregnanolone, which is the metabolite that actually makes you sleepy. So that might be a benefit for you to work with Magdalena and see if your progesterone levels are converting properly. And the weight gain, that's also probably more progesterone. And I don't know if Magdalena has comments, but for women that have high estrogen that also have issues with weight gain, it can be because your glucose levels are high because your insulin may not be working as well. So you may want to work on, things like glucose levels and using, a diet that doesn't necessarily increase your glycemic index as much.
Do you, hey, Megan, you might want to tell us whether is she taking progesterone orally? Shawn, do you typically work with progesterone orally or topically? I'm
one of those people that I like to make things easy and cheap. So the best delivery method I can think of to do that is topical initially, because I can put everything into one compound and it's one price.
I know I do have colleagues who do have the opinion that when the woman overdoses on oral progesterone, that's where it does show progesterone dominance. Okay, let's move on to other questions. I know there's a ton of them coming in. Question, please, from Rock. I cannot remember the name of the medication, but I was also prescribed. It's used to block estrogen, but I was hesitant because I read up on it and I read that medication is also used for breast cancer, so I never took it. I believe it was called Estidol or something of that effect. My question is, should I take the estrogen blocker to prevent cancer?
Usually estrogen blockers are things like tamoxifen. They actually, interestingly enough, are actually weak estrogens. And what they do is they bind to the estrogen receptors so weakly that they don't really stimulate it, although they actually do to a certain extent. But the thought process is if they can gently block it, then other estrogens won't stimulate the cells. To take it if you don't have cancer, I don't think it's recommended currently to prevent, although if you're a BRCA 1 or 2, person and you have a strong family history, those are things that you can talk to an oncologist about if you have one, or a geneticist, to see if you really would benefit from that, because those medicines have pretty strong side effect profiles too, because they're going to make you feel menopausal, and then you've got issues with osteopenia or osteoporosis and vaginal dryness, and so that can affect your life more than the prevention of something that may not actually happen.
Right. What about women in their 20s? Their regular OBG doesn't think hormone testing is necessary. So how can they get tested? Do regular doctors have access to Dutch test?
Yeah, everybody has. You can usually get a Dutch test from anyone from a health coach to a physician. They just need to have an account with Precision. Women in their 20s that want to get tested for hormones, if they ask, I always say this, if you ask a doctor for a test and they say no, my question is why? Like, it doesn't cost me any money to order a test. And so why we would say no to people, I have absolutely no idea. So if that happens, if you're not feeling heard, then I would find somebody. There are people out there that will do it, a naturopath for sure, or another alternative healthcare provider. Yeah, you might have to pay to see them, but at least you're going to get the testing that you want. But some doctors just, I mean, I see it all the time when women come to see me that they wouldn't order the test. I have absolutely no reason why. It's ridiculous.
Yeah. I have an appointment with my gynecologist on Monday. What test do I ask for? I had hormonal breast cancer stage 1 5 years ago. Susan is asking.
Well, I mean, if you're going to go the blood route, the testing that would be great for you would be how you're processing your estrogens and methylation and the 16 and 4 and 2 hydroxy estrone metabolites. So that would be a Dutch test. So finding somebody that, and you can do that remotely with anybody, just to then talk about, what supplements might work or what diet might work. Primarily though, if you're going to do blood testing, the only thing we can really check with blood is to look at, obviously genetically, I'm sure they did like, estrogen receptor, progesterone receptor and things like that, HER2/neu on your breast cancer, but to also look at, genetic screening to see if you had BRCA1 or 2, and then, or something else. And then you can only really look at estrogen and progesterone. You can order estrone and estriol levels, but you don't get the metabolites through blood. And so I think for you, it would probably be beneficial to just do a Dutch test at least once just to see.
Yeah, Susan, sorry, let's go back to Susan's question just for a second. I think it all depends also whether it's a functional gynecologist. I'm assuming it's not, it's more of the traditional one. And so there's always going to be a limitation. They work in a different framework altogether. If you are interested in more in the functional stuff, like what Dr. Shawn is talking about, then, you can order Dutch yourself pretty much, or through a number of practitioners, and then do a consult with someone who really knows how to interpret that. And Dr. Shawn is one of those people who can do that, who can work with you on that. So, okay, let's move on to the next question. Alex is asking, when is it not recommended to take DIM with calcium D-glucarate?
I don't see a reason why you couldn't take both all the time. I think usually they go hand in hand. So
absolutely, yeah. We actually use them in our estrogen reset kit together with sulforaphane, because DIM upregulates phase 1 liver detoxification, sulforaphane and calcium D-glucarate the phase 2 liver detoxification. So they really work hand in hand. Yeah. They don't contradict each other. Okay. Darcy, I don't know how to pronounce the name. What are your thoughts, the pros and cons in using script estradiol 0.1 milligram?
So I'm assuming by that dose, it's probably topical patch. Patches are great. It's the same as a cream. It's better because skin, using topical, the estrogen has less likely of a pathway to go to that 4-methoxy route. Also, if you're not taking it orally, it doesn't necessarily need to go through the liver to be processed. So you're really not stressing out your liver. So yeah, if your estradiol is going to be covered by insurance, that's a great method. I would say that most normal, that means I'm abnormal, normal gynecologists, if you don't have a uterus, are going to put you on that patch. They won't recommend progesterone. And I usually would recommend progesterone, just even if you don't have a uterus, because there's other benefits to your brain and all the other stuff that balancing out with the progesterone's a diuretic, and so it balances all that out. So you might want to consider going on progesterone too, if you can talk to your provider about that.
What is the thinking behind women losing their uterus and being only put on estrogen as the main protocol in OBGYN world? What's up with that?
That came from the initial studies that came out on Premarin about 30 years ago when there was actually a cover of Time magazine that said it was the fountain of youth. It was this, and so every woman got put on Premarin. And then what they found was about 3 years later, there were all these cases of uterine cancer coming in. So what they did was they said, okay, you have to take progesterone if you take estrogen, but if you don't have a uterus, and that was what they saw was uterine cancer, then you didn't need to take it anymore. And it's really kind of interesting. I can't tell you how many times I'll put a woman on progesterone, she'll go see her primary doc or her other gynecologist, and they'll take her off saying she doesn't need it.
Right, yeah. And they also put the same bucket, progestin and progesterone, bioidentical progesterone being one. Is ovarian cancer reversible? Liliet is asking.
Well, I wish it was. I could have saved my mom. In some instances, probably so. I mean, I think there's, if you look at, all these cases of ovarian cancer, there are many women that probably have something that goes backwards. Although ovarian cancer is a pretty virulent process. I think with any cancer, really, if you look into the data and you increase, or you change your diet and you change, the way that you live your life and you do the things you're supposed to do, possibly, I have a family member that was 39 that was diagnosed with breast cancer, stage 2, and she's now 7 years out and doing great. And so you just, sometimes it's luck too. And sometimes it's the way that you live your life and what you do with, reading the things that you can read, like Magdalena's book. But I also don't like cancer patients to feel like if they have a recurrence that they failed somehow. I mean, sometimes even if you do everything right, it doesn't always work. And so, but you shouldn't feel like you're a failure. And I think a lot of people feel that way when they have cancer and they are doing all this stuff and it recurs or something like that.
I have an aunt who had breast cancer, and then she went into remission for several years, and then their house burned down on the 2nd of January in the midst of a Polish winter, and which is like equivalent to a Chicago winter. And they eventually ran out. It happened in the middle of the night. They ran out in their, in their PJs and lost everything. Insurance wouldn't cover most of the things, asking them for receipts from, stuff from 20 years ago, right? So that was the end of that. And they were camping out and, moving from family home to family home and, while trying to rebuild their lives. She had a breast cancer recurrence, 7 months later. And so, just is the stress, right? Is it a horrendous trauma that you go through when you lose your home? So sometimes it's like, to your point, it can happen. And it's, and stress can be, or lifestyle, something traumatic can really bring it all back. I'm in a state that does not accept Dutch testing. What is an equivalent test? So actually, that's not correct. Because you can order Dutch testing yourself online and get it shipped to yourself, and then you get the results online, and then you work with a practitioner who can help you interpret that, Alex.
Sometimes doctors don't accept the Dutch test. That's totally different. Like you may have a doctor that says, oh, the Dutch test isn't accepted. That just means they don't want to interpret it, which totally different. But yeah,
they don't know how to.
Anybody can order it.
Is there a liquid DIM? I don't swallow pills. No, there isn't. It's the best ones are suspended in oil, but it's a little tiny pill. It's not a big one. I hear you, Rock, but
I mean, I guess if it was an oil like that, you could maybe open it up and put it in a shake or something. Yeah,
exactly. It's bitter, so just heads up on that. But you can. It's like a paste. So it's suspended in oil. It's a paste. You can just scoop it out. What DIM products do you suggest? Well, I'm going to be a little bit biased on this. We have, check out wellena.com. We have a lot of the supplements that we're discussing here today, including the estrogen reset kit that gives you a full detoxification ability for estrogen, and DIM is included in that. I did a Dutch test and it showed high progesterone. Estrogen dominance has historically been an issue for me. My estrogen metabolism is good, mostly 2OH pathway. Should I be concerned about a high progesterone?
My initial reaction would be no. I think progesterone is a pretty protective for brain health and helps you sleep. And I mean, obviously, if it was prolonged all the time, that probably isn't great. But for the most part, you probably just took the test right in the proper time when you were ovulating or right after you ovulated, and it was just supposed to be high. So I mean, you could check again if you're worried at a different time in your cycle if you wanted to, maybe at the beginning around day 5, just to make you feel better, to see that it comes down, and that would probably be beneficial if you're worried about it.
I want to pick up this this question here. My mom has a small cell carnemia, rare ovarian cancer. What kind of testing my mom should do? She has an appointment on Thursday. It also is on liver and pancreas, also doing radiation and chemo.
I mean, liver and pancreas metastases is stage 4, most likely. I would focus on, you could do a Dutch test, but I think the main thing with your mom right now would be to focus on, you know, her quality of life and to try and not let them tell her she can't do this or that. If it's something that she wants to do to feel better, like if she's got horrible, you know, night sweats or mood swings, or if she's not sleeping well, rather than, you know, trying Ambien or something like that, you could focus on progesterone or supplements. But yeah, I would just really focus on, you know, getting her as comfortable and looking at the symptoms that she's having maybe from her treatments and really focusing on just making her feel better with those symptoms.
Do you, would you recommend testing for BRCA here, BRCA1, BRCA2?
I mean, small cell carcinomas aren't usually related to that gene. That's usually your epithelial tumors, you know, of the ovaries. Serous cystadenocarcinomas, small cells, like she said, are pretty rare, but they're also fairly virulent. As you can see, it's already spread. So like I said, I would probably focus on just quality of life.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Brittany, what else do we have coming up? Do you take DIM, sulforaphane, and vitex every day of your cycle or only on certain days?
I mean, I usually have people take it every day. I think it's hard for herbs to really get, they're not medications, so they're not hitting things as strong. So trying to just do it for 14 days probably isn't going to get you the results that you want. And I think that, you know, most of these things were foods that people ate, and they probably ate them a lot. And we're trying to take these concentrated formulations, but I think that, you know, it's probably better if you try to take it every day. That would just be my recommendation.
Yeah, I agree. What do you recommend for postmenopausal women? What do you recommend? Got Dutch test back with a 4OH come back high.
I think the products that you have with Wilena that increase your DIM more than likely, or your I3C. Obviously, the recipes that you have that also have those natural compounds in them that you can just eat on a regular basis. But that would be the main one, would be to try to shift you to the 2-methoxy pathway. And if you're estrogen dominant, to also lower those levels by looking at calcium D-glucarate, or you know, increasing your fiber intake.
Also, Tamie, I would just say, if we can just go back to Tammie's question, there's a whole chapter here on supporting your liver. And I just want to remind you guys that estrogen detoxification happens in the gut, but it also happens in the liver. Mm-hmm. So supporting your liver with some really nice herbs, and there's some really great recipes you've got here, including teas. I'm going to be demoing as well on using things like dandelion root, burdock root, some schizandra, you know, incorporating those to support your liver as well, eating for supporting your liver. In a couple of days, we're going to be talking to Dr. Marisol Tejero about castor oils and putting that on your liver, also to support detoxification. You know, just by doing a lot of that kind of work can really shift your metabolites in a very positive way. So fiber is another one. You know, I remember when I was first diagnosed with estrogen dominance, this was like 8 years ago. Dutch wasn't around back then. And I got my results back. And all I did, just as an experiment, was for 2 months, I ate 2 tablespoons of flaxseed every day, and amazing quality of fiber that you get, both soluble and insoluble fiber from flaxseed. And that helped me to skew the balance towards the positive, the clean estrogen metabolites, and it relieved a lot of the symptoms of estrogen dominance. So again, it goes back to fiber, liver support. Okay, Susan is saying, don't you need to know where your levels are before taking all these supplements? I'm a big supplement person, and I am questioning it because I have a lot of aches and pains this past year. I'm 67. Also, sex is very painful, dry.
I think if you want to know what supplements are good to take and what maybe you don't need, I find that a lot of people that come visit me, they're on things they may not need, or 2, they're taking a lot of things that just overlap, like they've got the same things in them. So sometimes getting tested will help with that, especially if you're looking at detoxification pathways and maybe you don't even need to be on DIM. And then a lot of aches and pains, yeah, and sex is painful. If you're 67 and you're not on estrogen or something along those lines, you probably just have a lot of thinning of the vaginal mucosa and vulvar area. A friend of ours, Anna Quebeca, makes a great product called Julva. There's a lot of, hyaluronic acid. I prescribe that a lot for the vagina to help the mucosa kind of thicken back up if you can't take estrogen or don't want to take estrogen. So there's definitely things you can do. Vaginal DHEA, like Anna Quebeca's product, is really amazing at that too.
Yeah, it's a very popular product with our community. And the funny thing is that she always talks about Julva. It was first introduced as a product to help women rejuvenate the vulva. That's why the name, right? Yeah. But with our community, the biggest talking point was actually incontinence and how much it's helped women with incontinence. And we realized one thing that, it's nice to have sex, but when you go to the gym and you pee yourself, right, or you laugh and you leak, that's far more important for most women to fix rather than be thinking about great sex. So it was an interesting lesson that we learned from that. But great product, and women has got incredible results with. Oh,
I agree. Lovely.
Silvia is saying, how long can it take to regulate estrogen dominance, see improvements in symptoms and lab tests if we are doing lifestyle modifications plus supplements?
I think so I always look at nutrition, exercise, supplements as kind of being the long haul. If you're going to use progesterone to help offset some of the symptoms, that's going to be pretty quick. But that's not the fix. The fix is actually doing the work like you're talking about with lifestyle modifications and supplementation. And I look at things that way too. It's like, I want to help people right away. And so I might add progesterone, but the real work is going to be long-term, and doing things like the recipes and the supplements and changing the way that you live is definitely going to be the best method, but it takes a little bit longer. But I would say within a couple of months, you should start noticing something.
Yeah, Silvia, absolutely. I agree. I was going to say between 1 and 3 months. So you said it right in the middle, the 2 months. But we've had women already, who are still menstruating within the first cycle, already experiencing a lot more regular periods, not having mid-cycle spotting, improving their moods, losing weight. And so but I would say to really get the full benefits of things, if you can give yourself the permission for 3 months to really apply this lifestyle, you definitely will see some results. How long after stopping the mini pill should I wait for an accurate Dutch test?
That's a good question, and I don't think there's a universal answer. I would probably wait until you've had a period, and then because we want to check on day 21 or somewhere around there. So if you have at least one cycle, that means the hypothalamic pituitary ovarian axis has kind of woken back up. And maybe with the mini pill, it won't take as long as it might with a regular pill, just because you don't have that estrogenic component. But I would wait until your first cycle, especially if you're going to do a Dutch and you're spending the money. I would probably get it so that on day 1, that's your day 1, and then you start counting out to 21 days and go from there.
One of the common questions we also get, and I'm curious what your take on that is, if you're, let's say, if you're taking progesterone or if you're on estrogen, bioidentical estrogen, when should you stop taking all of that to test, or would you suggest just to continue being on it and test while on it?
I test when you're on it, because if I want to know what's happening with you with what you're on, right. So I can make adjustments. Maybe you don't need this, maybe you need more of that, but I always have people take it while they're on what they're on.
Okay, let's take one more question. This is somebody coming in. You're a popular person, Shawn.
Thank you.
So you're in demand.
Wow.
Let's see what else we've got coming up here. And for those of you, okay, Kristina, is incontinence from loss of estrogen or estrogen dominance?
Estrogen is going to be mostly from a loss of estrogen or incontinence, because what happens is when a woman is perimenopausal, menopausal, and she's, the estrogen is decreasing. We talked about the most incontinence is a multifaceted thing, having babies, having big babies, pushing a long time, your genetics, because you inherit the collagen and elastin from your family. But what that estrogen does is it strengthens the muscles and the vaginal mucosa, which helps kind of lift things a little bit. So if you already have some of those other factors and then you throw in decreased estrogen levels, it can over time weaken those pelvic muscles, and that can cause the incontinence or add to it.
What about testosterone on those muscles, that area there too?
Testosterone can help directly and indirectly, just because it also will convert to a little bit of estrogen in the body through aromatase. But yeah, if you're, and I personally, I think if you're going to do that, you probably have to make it more vaginal estrogen, but if you have estrogen levels that are getting up high enough because you're taking a good dose, like the lady that was taking that 0.1 milligram patch, that will help with vaginal estrogen, just because the blood levels get up so high.
And you guys, one of the teas I'm drinking today is a red clover and a red raspberry leaf, and both of them are slightly estrogenic. So even though I tend to be estrogen dominant, as you heard us talking about at the beginning of the video, I do want to get my estrogen up, because I am feeling like it is slowly coming down. And occasionally there is a bit of an incontinence going on. So there is something that I'm trying to manage that with herbs and see how that's going to go. So it's interesting, isn't it, that you can be estrogen dominant, but yet still be drinking herbs and incorporating that into your life, including flaxseed, which contains phytoestrogens, naturally occurring estrogens. And it's perfectly fine, because you do want to get those estrogens up and to the healthier level, and so that you don't have symptoms, but yet support your liver, your gut health, add a couple of supplements to help you detox that estrogen. So it's not one or the other, it's one and the other that should be happening. Do we have time for one more question, Shawn? Are you okay to stay for one more?
Sure.
Let's see what we have. I know there was one that just popped out, Brittany. Does Dr. Shawn treat PMDD? Is he familiar with it?
Yeah, I think any gynecologist would be familiar with it. The question is, how do you treat it? And a lot of docs will just throw people on, a serotonin uptake inhibitor or Wellbutrin. And those are occasionally things that might be needed. I'm not a psychiatrist, but if I feel like a patient has, or a psychologist, if I feel like a patient has bad PMDD, then I will definitely refer out. But I do think there's a component of PMDD that, if not a big component, that is a hormone imbalance. And usually it's progesterone deficiency, or progesterone deficiency combined with high estrogen can be a double whammy. So yeah, I see it. I've had women actually tell me they've gotten extremely better by just adding 2 weeks of progesterone to the second half of their cycle. So PMDD it doesn't have to be something that you get overly frustrated with, keeping in mind that some people also have added depression with that, and depression is a whole different beast that's attacked sometimes in the same ways with nutrition and things, but can also need other providers to help.
Awesome. It's so good to have you here.
Thanks. You too. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, everybody. My new book is out, Overcoming Estrogen Dominance. A lot of things we talked about here is the lifestyle changes come from here. If you want to work with Dr. Tassone, can we just pop again the website, tassonemd.com, one-on-one consultations. That's the website. We'll put it in the comments there as well. So when you're watching on replay, you can just easily click on that. He does do telemedicine, which is awesome. And you are one of the very few people who still takes insurance. It's pretty amazing.
I know, it's I've always taken it, and I just feel like anybody should really have access. It doesn't always pay the bills, but I can sleep good at night. And so I just want to say, you sent me a couple copies of your book, and I'm gonna actually give them away on my Instagram page. But it's probably one of the neatest books I've ever seen, as far as just the production of it. I mean, content aside, it's a really pretty, and your other book is the same way, but it's a really
No, it's not. The first one did not have all these illustrations.
I can't imagine. With my book coming out and there's not those pictures, I don't know what that took to make, but it had to have taken forever. And I applaud you with all that info. I mean, that one book on estrogen, that's just estrogen dominance. I mean, that's what's fascinating. And so I think it's a really awesome book. And I would really encourage people to just have that in your library, because most women at some point in their life are going to be estrogen dominant. I mean, it's just, that's the way it is. So definitely, I applaud you.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for being here today, for asking questions, taking care of yourself, being proactive about your health, not surrendering to being a victim to whatever you're being told, and taking things into your own hands is, I think, really exemplary. And that's why you're here, because you're proactive and you want to own your health. Thanks, everybody, and I'll see you later today. I'm doing a book reading from one of the chapters, and we're going to do some FAQs. All right, thanks for now. Bye.